known Tessa and Carlo both for 40-something years, and Carlo is a critic and curator and writer on arts and culture, based in New York City and in what's the other place? Based in New York City, right? Okay. And Tessa, the artist, she's been working in film for many years and is considered a member of the Cinema of Transgression. Her films have screened internationally in museums, galleries, and seedy bars, including MOMA, MOCA, the Whitney Museum, and K.W. Institute for Contemporary Art. She's recently presented gallery installations in New York and Scandinavia, and has curated extensively, been a juror for numerous festivals, and was president of the board of directors for the New York Film-makers Co-operative for several years. I'm going to welcome Tessa and Carlo. My partner, son Tristan, who couldn't quite make it tonight, but today, sorry. But I got to say one thing, that I've known them for a long time, and I was actually third wheel on their first day. Walking around, they won't remember it, but we spent an afternoon and evening like walking around downtown, and then I shut it off.
What could you say?
Thanks, Doug. We have indeed known each other more than a minute. We were both young and stupid when we met. Now, at least for sure, we're not young anymore.
That's true.
Thanks everyone, and thanks Tessa. I guess we've probably talked most every day for the last 40-something years, but not that we're always so quotidian, but most of us in our conversations, we kind of ask how you're doing or what you're doing, and we don't really get it down to asking each other why you're doing it. So I thank you for this opportunity to talk to you about this. It's a good show.
Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah, let's see. So, maybe take a moment to totally forget what I wanted to ask you. Oh, I know. I was thinking, like, since, we do talk a fair amount, I remember when you were first working on the show,
Yes.
you had, it's tricky. I'm a writer. I know it's not easy to come up with a title for something. You kind of want to be catchy and not corny. But you were running a bunch of different titles for what the show would be in your head.
Yes.
And I don't remember any of them. The show's called Instruments of Light, which I like because it sounds like some sort of weird band or something. But if you could generally remember back to all the ways you were trying to title the show, what you were trying to convey, just as a way to talk generally about the show.
Generally, it was, I'm distracted.
I'm gonna turn it on.
I got enough voices in my head already.
I think the remote will be on.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know.
We're going to hold for a second. So,
No, it's
before I answer the question,
It's
I was
not
trying to turn this out.
it's down.
So I'm going to hold it before, I'm going to wait till a minute. So, I guess.
Could you guys come a little forward towards us?
We're
There's chairs. People with cake here, just come sit on the bench. You'll hear.
It's really hard to hear you.
Okay, I can't hear.
Yeah,
I'm
we're still on the bench.
not old person.
Would you like it on side?
I hear you guys a lot, but I like to hear.
Yeah, sit on the bench. Maybe someone will join you on the bench.
Okay, so we were talking about instruments of light and talk a little bit about.
Well, there were some alternative titles. And I think there were different elements of the show that I was considering. One was the sort of prismatic psychedelic element. And then there was the other, another element was, the tactile systems that I use in my filmmaking, in my live projections that are part of my filmmaking.
Yeah, I
So
like it.
those two elements.
It's about the material, but also about the process.
Exactly.
Really nice and light, of course.
And the equipment.
Yeah. Yes, the instrumentality. Now, just to pretend we're not looking at films and installations, as if we're always looking at a painting. One of the kind of issues that always goes back and forth is between representation and abstraction. And it seems to me as an artist, you've always been kind of dancing between the two. So that you have really abstract elements, and then also where does narrative fit in there, non-linear narrative, but the text, you got word things, which is another kind of more semiotic form of representation. But it seems to me you're going between representation and abstraction.
Well, yeah, I mean, simply put, film, analog film is recorded light on a piece of chemically treated plastic, So in that way, that's so if you're thinking of recorded light, that's a very abstract concept, basically. And you're talking about different temperatures, and different degrees, and different tones. So if you compare that to painting, that's where the painting aspect is. And I've never really been interested in narrative per se, because I usually like the idea of one or more progressions, ideas coexisting. So if there's all different meanings occurring at the same time. So these newer pieces that involve text, actually a lot of my films involve text, but I work with subtitles taken out of context and put in new context, but that's practically invisible in a lot of multiple projection films, but it's there. So I've been working with text for a while, but I've started working more directly using letters actually, which fall completely between abstraction and narrative when you think about it. They are in themselves abstract forms, but together they form a narrative. So, so when you consider that, the letters themselves are abstract, but if you take the time to try to read the text, they're just very short prose. They're like memories, basically. So, that's one element of abstraction and figuration that combined.
And then just for people who care about the analog and stuff, this is not, the lettering is not a digital thing. You're doing it with Letraset, that old kind of.
Right. Well, it came from a missing touching film. I like to, excuse me, touch film, and I've been working with handmade slides with these bugs and marks, and so I wanted to work directly with film. So I was working with hole puncher, and then I started working with Letraset, which is a pre-digital graphic medium, where the letters are transferred directly by hand onto the film. So that became a sort of animation process, because for each letter I had to do a number of frames for you to be able to register the letter. So it was somewhere between 10 is the minimum and 14 starts to flow a little slower. So, I was playing with that according to what I could get my hands on, actually, because there's not a lot of that around. And, interestingly enough, after that piece, after the secret message film, which is a part of that piece, but otherwise, I started to run out of letters. So I had to order, went on eBay, and I was ordering it mostly from Holland and England, where I've got some, but occasionally you get a sheet and it would just be totally fused to the plastic, so it was unusable. But that's diverting a little bit from the point, but that's pretty much, a lot of my filmmaking is determined by what there is available, what there is around, and what I can use, in terms of what I can find, both in terms of footage and materials, and I work with that, basically. So, and in terms of narrative, I'm interested in progression of a degree, but I'm interested more in free association.
Yeah, and multiple, like with the multiple projections, you're using numerous films, lots of slides, lots of, you're kind of, it's what, I guess, in the tradition of expanded cinema, you're kind of getting a little bit of an overload. So that's sort of, it ruptures narrative, but it also accumulates.
Right, I like it when there's a sensory overload. I think that's interesting. But that's not the only thing. I mean, I like to provoke a reaction, like an emotional reaction, to the imagery rather than a sort of more analytical or logical interpretation.
Yeah, I mean, you've only done a few movies over all the years where you actually had characters talking something approximating a plot line.
Right.
I've always thought this is kind of movie before there.
Yeah, I've always found the live action films, I mean, there are some that are really nice. I like to work spontaneously with live action. Like, I mean, if we're talking about films, and you know that Nymphomania was one of my favorites because it was very spontaneous. But there were some films where I actually made a storyboard and then record. I found that really boring because you make the storyboard, then you go with the camera and you kind of copy it and bring it to life. And then you put it together. But it doesn't really develop a life of its own to the same degree that other methods of working have.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something about your process allows a sense of discovery, kind of knowing exactly what it's going to be like at the end. Is it really, you sort of why bother making it?
Well, it's really not the way that creative process works. It changes as it goes along. You work with what it gives you rather than what you bring to it. I mean, in making live action films that are sequential and narrative, there's always things that there's a part of it that comes to you, but it's not the same or to such a great degree as working with a lot of different things together, elements together in life.
And it's nice, I mean, I'm sure as you were thinking about all the different things you were making, you were also trying to figure out how they relate to each other. Maybe we should just take a minute to kind of mentally walk through the show so we can talk about some of the pieces. You mentioned this one on the kind of folding screen thing, which
Yes.
was an element in a piece you did at Howl in New York City a couple of years ago.
Yes.
This is the one which features a lot of electroset, a lot of things like that. Maybe talk about that before.
Yeah, this is called Otherwise. The installation is called Otherwise. It's a triple projection of digitized film and handmade slides, basically. There are 3 films involved. One is the Letraset prose film, which is coming from the far right angle. And that's called Secret Message. Did I say that? I think so. And that's a little prose piece. And then in the middle, and then on this side, is a film called Moonlight, which is a mixture of video, handmade film, and video and handmade 16mm film digitized. And the third element are the insects that are basically digitized handmade slides of insects and plants. Oh, it's called natural history. They're insects and plants. And I sort of made that. I made it after my mother died. So that's sort of in memory of her, sort of, I think, yeah. And not completely, but somewhat. It's about loss, really, that one. And then what do you want to talk about?
Well, that's good. Well,
Yeah,
actually,
no,
since
it's
we're on that, we might as well say that behind it, there's a little shelf
yes.
with handmade slides.
Exactly.
And this is literally like taking a bit of a flora or fauna or something like that, or insect, and kind of mounting it in a slide,
Yes.
as you used to do with film.
Yes, I've been collecting dead insects and then mounting them in slides, and those are actually, some of those are source material for the natural history part of this installation. Source material of natural history channel on this installation. And that, I'm thinking of making 3 of these films with the text. That one's number 1, this is number 2. And I haven't made number 3 yet because I just finished this one this year. And this one, this one's called Sundial. And this one is a mixture of video, Super 8 film, handmade slides and polar pan slides as well, and then there's the text, which is letraset on 16mm film or digitized. So this is, this is about basically about celebration of nature, and it was about basically mostly focusing on the summer. And in an ideal situation, I've been trying to present it on a circular screen, projected from the inside, so it's like a sundial. But I haven't been able to find the right equipment to have it. I need a battery-operated short-throw projector that lasts longer than 3 hours, so that's where I kind of got that far. And so it's presented on this large screen, which is really nice.
Beautiful.
And I shot a lot through prisons and just walking the light, basically. Walking the sun. This is about the sun, and that's about the moon, basically. So they're day and night. I'm not sure what the third one's going to be now. Let's see. I'm working with elements of elemental.
Yeah. And it's funny because I think of their earlier movies were, well, rather dark, but also quite urban. So much of your movies were only made in a place like New York had its economic and social nature, and you have been more up in the categories. There's kind of a pastoral bent to your work, more and more, I think. Is that safe to say?
Well, I shoot all the time, that's the thing, right? So, excuse me. When we're up here, it's, there's a lot of nature around, and I go out and shoot.
Yeah.
In New York, I'll go out and shoot if it's feel good. So I've been accumulating footage for a while, and I wanted to make a film that was kind of like this, but I didn't know it was going to turn out like that. Like that is actually just reflections of the sun shot through a prison. On the reflections of the sun on the pond through a prison. So there's a lot of reflections in this work.
And there's a lot of, it works a little bit about projection, but it's very much about reflection, refraction. So you have them as elements within your film, but then you have a slide here which is being altered by the prism.
There's no slide there.
So what is that?
It's
Just fabric.
Yeah, there's no slide. It's called the slide projector installation. But there's actually no film involved in this. It's just like material as a piece of lace in the slide projector. Yeah, it's very simple. And this one here is, they're all pieces of, they're all materials that I use in light projection. So I thought I would break it down, So maybe in the live projections I wouldn't use a real piece of lace, I might use the slide with lace in it, or I could replace it. This has feathers and netting and color gels and some prismatic cell, let's call it. So
not filmic at all, just entirely about this light.
Yeah, there's no
Refraction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Instrument.
What's that?
It's an instrument of light.
It's an instrument of light, thank you. And so you see here, those snakeskin stuff on the side. That's that's a handmade slide. This is a single channel mix of a multiple projection that I made during COVID. It was going to be part of a really ambitious international feed during COVID for an artist friend who was having this show, and his idea was for me to take these multiple projections and project them on a dancer in Spain, and then the music would come from another country. But it was impossible to manage. Technically, it was impossible to manage because the dancer would have to have both a projector and the computer set up somehow with Zoom. And at the time, it couldn't be managed, basically. But that was the reason for making this in my attic. My attic studio, COVID attic studio. And Carlo saw the live projection, but that slide is, I use like a prism, a big prism, and I split it. I use all these prisms in live projection as well as color cells and my hands and whenever I can have my hands on or feel like it.
And then that's like, right here on the tripod, that's actually, visible manifestation of that in its most object form, that's a kaleidoscope.
That's right. Well, yeah.
So if you look through, you'll get this film and kind of that kaleidoscope.
Yeah, that's another instrument of that. That was made initially for a show that was in a shul that had no electricity but had beautiful stained glass windows. And initially I thought I was going to try to make the camera obscura in the shul, in the space, but the light, there were trees on one side and on the side where the sun was mostly on the south side, it faces east, I think. So it wasn't possible, so I came up with this idea of using this old, that's a 16mm tripod, the case for the tripod that is holding it up, basically. So sort of a reflective piece, and once again it's breaking down the exposing the transparent color there is.
And then I guess we should talk about
The stream.
the stream, which
That's
is
just fun, isn't it?
yeah.
It's a video piece, and it's a three monitor installation, 3-channel installation of the stream that I thought would just be a nice symbolic thing to have. I wanted to have more water in this, and that was a way to get more water.
Yeah, it's really nice. You seem to be working a lot with these really temporal events. Particularly streamer. I remember Shigeko Kabuta, was married to Namjoon Pike, did a huge waterfall as a video piece, and when I think of like some of your slides, I think of who made that movie Moth-like, which was Stan Bradford, which was just moth, similar but motion picture, right?
Yes.
Like moth things, so a moth flitting about or water streaming. These are things that I guess is like filming a time-based medium can capture, but they're almost resist capture that way.
Yeah, there's also sort of a transcendental element to that. This lace piece resembles a mandala to me in some way too. So it's, refraction in a circular way is different to refraction in a horizontal way. So, there are all these systems to consider.
Yeah, and then even before we were thinking about representation or abstraction, a lot of the things you get are about pattern, which is kind of, crazy. But that in a way, the lace is patterning, that's patterning. There's a lot of elements in your film which read like as patterning, and patterning's, it's ancient, especially back in Islamic culture and stuff like that. But it's a very we don't have an easy way. We can read it, but we don't. It's been difficult in the West. Patterns, but pattern decorations and movement is kind of has so many detractors for so long. It's because patterning, ornamentation, these kind of things are
Well, it's a different form of abstract language, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you think about it. So, it's very primitive. That's, I think, the way that we relate to a lot of imagery is on a very primal level. So,
Yeah.
I didn't let you finish.
No, I was just going to say I think pattern is inherently subversive.
Well,
But,
I don't know about that. I think it's not. I think it's somewhat superficial.
If we fight about this, I'm going to
But anyway, maybe.
I don't know how we do this.
Oh, we got all the time you want.
All right. Let me ask one more, and then we'll open it up to questions. We share a similar kind of pantheon of people who've been in avant-garde, experimental film, and all those things, and they're so influential at their time amongst artists. They kind of have a lot of sway when you think about the kind of ways ideas circulate. Filmmakers are relatively central in a lot of scenes, but there's no money in it. And so you get like whatever we mentioned, brackets, you could whatever, anything, or whatever, you might or whatever, it's all the way through so many different generations. And at a certain point, they realized all their painter friends got rich, and they got maybe a teaching job if they're lucky. So it is funny because over the years we see whatever Tony Conrad or Bruce Conrad, all of them seem to end up trying to address this other aspect of the art world, which would be the cube, the exhibition space instead of the black box. And they try to do objects to sometimes incredible success, and sometimes sort of like stick with the films. But you've now done a number of exhibitions, which as much as you worked in nightclubs when you were younger, you work a lot with art spaces now. So maybe talk about translating something which is basically always been thought of either on the monitor or the black box, which is the cinematic space the museums create, and kind of creating it, mapping it out for this kind of immersive thing that you walk through as you wear any other kind of art show.
Right.
Sorry that was so long.
Well, I have shown occasionally in galleries over the years, and it's always or gallery spaces or art spaces, we might call it that. And it's in the pre-digital era, it was a lot more challenging because you had to come up with a way to do it. And when Mike Oster happened to put nepotism show at Buffalo, he invited me he included me in the show, and I had to think of a way to present a film in a gallery space. So what I found then, I can't remember the date, it was a long time ago, I found one of those little rear screen projectors that traveling salesmen used to use, and I put the film in, and that was weird because the film would be inserted into a cartridge and play on a loop. It could play on a loop. So that was what I did at the time. You had to guess it, coated with polyester to make it strong.
Durable, running.
Exactly. But since
But you like the loop idea because also you've always liked peep shows.
Yes, well that
You're
was
not so much for the subject matter.
yeah, but not that film, not
Yeah,
film. So I started investigating that, when I was showing a film in the gallery in New York in the 80s, which is a great house where I wanted to have a film of Michael Playboy on the loop as a peep show.
So actually you put the 25 cents.
Yeah. That was when I discovered the MOMA brand with the crack machines on machine places and stuff like that. And I couldn't find anybody who could bring that off. So, there are different things over time. I don't really,
But let's talk a little bit. I just kind of mentioned.
sorry, transition.
I'm also just thinking about like this kind of but also just about like you're doing things very close to what this fetish we have for the object, which is part of the art.
Okay, well, everything's for sale if you want to buy it. I talked to, if that's what you want to talk about, I sat next to this, I was talking to this collector and I knew that I was a filmmaker, so that's way too much. I have the equipment, I have the projectors, and it's true, but is that what you're talking about?
That's
Everything's for sale if you want to buy it, and then there's the merch, which there are some coasters that I made that are from the natural history element of
Were they in the gift shop? Do we have the coasters in the gift shop?
What's that?
Are the coasters consigned to the gift shop?
Correct.
All right,
yes.
good.
Yeah. So that is that what you're talking about?
No, but that's good enough to talk about. There is people do whatever we
It's not
pose
the
in
point.
another thing about like the collapse of the NFT market right now.
Right.
And yet is that over? But people do like there's whatever the painting that goes over the couch or the sculpture you trip over when you step back to look at a painting. But people do like a certain degree of materiality with art.
Sure.
And you're working with craft without materiality, then you're making objects.
Right. Yes, they're sculptural objects, but they're ephemeral. That's not going to be there forever, is it? Some of them can I like the ephemeral quality of film, you know, and I like the fact that you have to be in the dark to see it all the time as well. You know, with video, with digital media, it's completely different, and you know that is much more marketable. And you know, film is actually suited to NFTs, but I don't really like the idea myself. And in terms of being marketable, I don't know, that's not really something that I thought of.
None of us did.
No, exactly. So you know, but yeah, I guess it's a privilege to be a filmmaker that has the opportunity to show in an art space, because you know it's a way of having something there for people to see more than at a specific time on a specific day, which is you know, and that's a nice thing to do. You know.
Just on the screen.
All right, so let's see if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, I do. Could you talk a little bit more about your process, specifically with things like superimposition? And as you're gathering up material, are you thinking about overlay at that point, or do you come in afterward and sort of second?
Well, that's a good question. Sometimes, you know, I gather footage, I gather, you know, material, and sometimes I do look specifically for things, you know, like now, it used to be that I would find stuff in yard sales and thrift stores and markets, odd little shops and stuff, but now you go on eBay, look, you know, so occasionally I'll go all the way through eBay looking at all the films I've got, all the Super 8 films, all the 16mm films, and if something catches my eye, I'll get it, but occasionally I'm looking for something in particular, and you know what, usually it's not there really, you know, I can't find it, but I'll find, you know, it's the same sort of random search that you have where you go anywhere and you find something that spontaneously is of interest. And I don't really plot it, I get what I get, and then I'll try different things together. I'll spend hours in my studio playing around.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll record it. And sometimes some of that recording will end up turning into something else, turning into a bigger project. Sometimes it won't. But basically, I just try combinations of different genres that I think will work together. Like I usually gravitate a bit towards horror films and fantasy films and never documentaries.
Porn.
Yeah. Never sports films.
Well, you had the Muhammad Ali boxing.
Oh yeah, I did use boxing film. But and no.
Which one really good was
Yeah.
actually.
No parades, no like military stuff. Maybe some space exploration. You know, I don't want to get off on a tangent here.
But it is nice because you have westerns, you have whatever all it,
Yeah.
and it is nice because they're as elements are almost immediately recognizable by genre. A lot of things you do, and so that's a good way that you're kind of collapsing or breaking down narrative while you're putting it in.
Yes, and I mean, in talking about this film, I just accumulated stuff that already exists, you know, and because I didn't have access to all my films because I was like up in an attic in the Catskills, and my stuff was in the city. I went in after I shot a bunch of footage on it, recommissioned to get some gels and a couple of things, but by then I'd already got quite far into making a piece. So, you know, I robbed a lot of this footage.
Now, are you using more digital to do those recombinations?
I try not to, but in this instance I did, yeah. I try to keep it using film projection, but in this instance I use digital projection.
Now, do you,
Combined with the Super 8, here there's like videos, Super 8, and that makes slides. So I had some Super 8 films that I were at, a couple of horror films.
And just one other element, we have the sound turned off now, but both of these films, this is like Annabelle Lee, right?
Annabelle Moynihan is the name too. Annabelle Moynihan did the soundtrack.
She changed her name a few times.
And the musical there is by Mark Abramson.
Right, and so
Yeah.
your early films, because everything was kind of, it's basically beginning of sample culture, all that stuff happening. You're grabbing films, you're also grabbing sound elements. So all your old films are basically furrowing sound, and now you're actually working with musicians and composers.
That's right, yeah.
Sorry.
Hi.
Sundial, what's the origin of the text? Is it a poem or something you wrote?
Yes, I wrote it, yeah, it's just
Okay.
a sort of a prose piece, I call it, rather than a poem or
Okay.
something.
And was it conceived before or after you shot the footage?
Sort of simultaneously, it takes a long time to do this, it's like 10 frames for every letter. So
Okay.
it's a very long process, so it can be several months at least, so during that time I would shoot more, and I shot some beforehand when I was considering the film, so there's, over a long time, so, over a period of time.
So what did you shoot Sundial with?
What did I shoot? I shot it with, this is shot with,
camera?
what kind of camera?
Yeah.
I haven't, the Super 8 film was shot with a brown broad Miso camera. The video was shot with just a small camera, I don't have a fancy camera. And the slides were shot with a Nikon 35mm camera. And that's it. And the rest is handmade.
I just love the juxtaposition of the letters over the nature, because you were talking about free association and what, as an abstract form. And I've always thought of individual letters being representations of nature forms, like an M being a wave, and etc. So this is like, and especially the way they're animated, makes them alive. It just really very brings it back to pattern, back to the origin of it. In other words, where it's really evocative to contrast, to see the letters alive like that, and also isolated individually against the background of nature. It's really,
Yeah, thank you. Well, the letters themselves do have a strong character,
Exactly.
they break up, the older ones, they break up, and they have these cracks in them, so they are like archaeology in their own way, and I also included little pieces of, grammar, I suppose you call them.
Punctuation.
Punctuations, that's right, punctuation, to be in there as well.
This is whatever's nice too. I like that.
Yes,
Yes, hi.
Carlo was mentioned some of your filmmaking predecessors like Stan Brakhage and Maya Deren. And that, 70 years of avant-garde cinema has had a kind of mysterious, but sometimes quite perceptible effect on mainstream filmmaking.
Yes.
Like Hollywood filmmaking. I just wondered if you, now, granted, a lot of musicians don't care to listen that much to other musicians' music, but you yourself may be a lifelong moviegoer, movie watcher. And I just wondered if there was ever a time when you were watching like a mainstream motion picture and a sequence appeared and you thought, I could have done that.
Yeah.
That's a bit like my stuff.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
You have.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a I don't know if I go, well, I could have done that, but I would say that's really interesting. I love that editing. I can analyze that, and that inspired me. Yeah, so, rather
Not that
than
it
thinking,
necessarily looked like one of your own
Right.
creations.
rather than thinking I could have done that, it's like, oh, I could do that, and I really like this effect. So, there's a piece of dance sequence in Taxi Driver that I really like, and there's also there's the trip sequence in the trip that's fascinating to me. Actually, I use some of it in there, indirectly actually. But there are a few things like that. There's a beginning influenced by Jean Cocteau, so I don't go, I could be, Martin Scorsese. I'm not thinking that I could be Salma Schumacher. I'm not thinking I could have done that, but more that that's interesting. Yeah, I don't, I think that's what you need.
How did you come to collaborate with Mark and Annabelle
on the sound, on the music?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I've been talking to Annabelle about this film for a long time. And, for at least like a year. I asked her a year ago, but she plays the violin, and she loves to go and play with Irish musicians and play fiddle music, folk music, and but she has had other types of bands as well, sort of electric folk bands, and as well as bands that use they're not really electric folk bands, and she had a band called Blood Axis, which was controversial in some way, more to do with the content of the music itself. But I completely trust her, right? And so I just asked her if she would make some music, and she agreed to it. And she asked for prompts. She said, "Well, what's the mood of what's this?" And I didn't really. We talked a bit about it, and then she punched this out like in a week. Eventually, we worked simultaneously. She said, "What am I going to do? I need to see the film." So I had a rough edit, and I sent that to her, and then she said, "Okay, I'm going. I need some." She went into the studio and she came up with a rough edit of a rough mix, and then we kind of communicated by email and text, and then she nailed it down, and then it was perfect. So I was very happy.
She just plays solo.
Well, she did a whole. Well, no, it's not just solo. There's a number of different things, different elements in there. She sampled some music. She added some of her own music. She put some different tracks in that she had, where she played the instruments and someone else did. I think I'm not totally sure. Or maybe they were, pre-made sounds. It was a sort of collage in the same way that I work with film. It's music,
Yeah,
it was tracks.
it's interesting with Mark. I mean, I don't think
Mark, yeah.
your stuff isn't. It's not like literally synced the way Hans Zimmer doing the score for a Hollywood movie. You need that moment of silence. You need that moment of growing suspenseful music. You're not really like you're working differently. As you say, more collage.
Yes. And Mark, I asked Mark if he had some music a while ago. He gave me a whole lot of music, and I've used quite a lot of it, which is it's something about the tone.
You had Jim Thurwell, I think, too.
Yeah.
You haven't worked with a bunch of musicians out there. Is there any more questions?
Yeah, in retrospect, what is the association with Cinema of Transgression do for you and to you?
Now,
Yeah, in retrospect.
could you say that again? What's
What is the label Cinema of Transgression
the
do for you and to you, your reputation and your work?
Well, I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, it's something that never really existed except today in everybody's mind. So, it's a fabricated movement. So, in a way, it's a bit of a joke, but it's supposed to mean that I'm a subversive filmmaker, and I do try to be subversive and have been in many ways, but that was a long time ago. That was in the 80s that the Cinema of Transgression movement supposedly existed, and I think it's over.
Well, yeah, but I mean, obviously it lingers because it's still, you're still associated with it.
Yeah, I'm associated with it, and people will, it's like with everything, people want me to be making films the way that they were then. They're like, no, you're not making films the way you did when you were 20, so they're surprisingly not. But it's like there are some films that people really like, and a lot of the younger generation latch onto those films and they really relate to them now, which is interesting. So, films that I made 40 years ago resonate with people in their 20s in a different way, but that has become much more mainstream, talking mainstream. Anyway.
Yeah, all artists have like an odd relationship to labels, right? They can kind of help your career, but then they become some heavy baggage to carry on from there.
Yes, it's mixed.
Mixed blessing.
Yeah, mixed, definitely. Because it, yeah.
This is not really a question. You know, somebody that many of us in this room, you know, passed away 2 days ago, Michael Henry Jones. He was a great avant-garde, you know,
Well, I can talk about that.
filmmaker in his own way.
Yeah,
So let's just have a minute of silence for
yeah,
that.
that would be fine.
What's the question?
The question was,
And Henry
could we
Jones.
remember a great filmmaker friend who died a couple of days ago? In fact, the installers in the show had to witness me dealing
I
with
just
that
said
while
let's
we
have
were
a
installing.
moment of silence for him.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Carlo, could you outline some of the films early films that Tessa made around the time you guys started your relationship?
All right, well, I think she already made Baby Doll when I met her, which was really great, and it was basically, there was a strip club in Lower Manhattan called the Baby Doll, and it's dancers who dance there kind of talking, and I think it's a movie you can see like kids right now are just kind of, wow, that's really amazing because we're trying to, culture's trying to catch up and realize that maybe other things were being said by just white men at that, at that time. So Tessa's movies got a really, it's really interesting as a movie that feminists can get coming from a generation that was probably keeping some distance from the harsher or whatever certain aspects of feminism. I think in my mind, because for one thing, it's sex positive, and we had to work, and we had this kind of whole thing in the '70s where a lot of feminists took the rather arch position that any sex or things like that, especially committed to film, was a kind of form of ongoing rape for women. So to me, that's a weird one, as it kind of goes through time now, that people can relate to it probably more than they could at the time. And then, what else have you done? So then basically, I think I've known most of the film, maybe done some anthropological thing beforehand, but basically I've been rooting for most of your films. So some of the darker before.
Yeah, well, that's the anthropological.
Yeah, I think those are the two. But in that moment of like, it's another kind of historical thing in a long career, but sometimes the early stuff gets paid attention to. But some of the films she made during that kind of moment of Cinema of Transgression, especially like Rat Trap, which is a really dark movie, which kind of overlays a junkie and the killing of a rat. And it's still like, when they showed it in MOMA a couple of years ago, it's still difficult. It's still upsetting. So you have that body of work, and then you just kept trying different things. I mean, one of the things really early on would be that a lot of your work was in these clubs, because nightlife was the place where a lot of art and culture was kind of commingled in New York at that time. So you were working with many different people, many at a time, and doing multiple projections, where it wasn't just you trying to do projections, it was like you and like 3 other people, and everyone's got multiple slide projectors and film projectors and gels and things like that. So it's sort of like going back to the '60s notion of what a light show could be, but so much more mediated, because it wasn't so much about the gooey effects that Bill Ham and people like that created, which was the liquid light show with the oil and water trays and gels. So
Yeah, no overhead projectors.
no overhead projectors. So there we go. Those are ones which I remember at the moment, but I'll smoke some pot and remember some more later. Is that good? Do I have,
Any more questions at all?
Thank you, Tessa.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.